Redditors born into a criminal family. How and when did you realize something wasn't quite right?
Silent scan.
When I was little, my parents grew tomatoes. We had several long greenhouses full of tomato plants behind our house. It wasn't until a few years ago I was talking to my sister, and she asked me if I could remember ever eating or even seeing a tomato come from those plants. Oh, maybe they really were tomato plants. But your parents are horrible at gardening. Several long greenhouses of horrible gardening.
Silent scan.
My dad came home with a pretty bad hole in his shoulder and told me to dump rubbing alcohol on it. He said he tripped, but the hospital was too expensive. And I didn't recognize the truck he came home in. Rubbing alcohol on an open wound? Wow, your dad's a beast. I once got rubbing alcohol on my anus and almost went to the air.
Silent scan.
When I was a young child, my brother, William, got convicted with murder. The police, while looking for him, woke our family up in the middle of the night, kicking our door in and dragging him out. My mother woke me up pissed off because they broke our door. Not that he wouldn't be coming back for about 20 years, but that our door was now broken. I remember thinking that night of how much was my family actually into if this could happen without batting an eye. This leaves me with too many questions. Not upset their child was being taken away. Just pissed about the door. We knew you were coming, but damn, the door. I'm not sure, and I'm not in the psychology field or anything, but this actually doesn't surprise me much. Some people find it difficult to deal with major problems and events directly. She may simply not have wanted to think about the fact that her son just got taken away by the cops. So she focuses her anger on something else, so she doesn't have to think about it, because thinking about it would be too painful.
Silent scan.
As a child, I spent most of my time with my grandmother. Every day after a soccer game, all of us will go to my house, and my grandma will cook up something for all of us. Even when I move away for university, the guys still come over and help my grandma do her groceries, water her garden, and help her around the house. Then one day my grandma called me and say that most of the guys are gone because the police are after them for drug trafficking, and apparently one of the guys is actually the big boss of the region. All my grandma cared about at that point was how is she going to go grocery shopping from now on. My grandma used drug trafficking gang to do house chores for her. Your grandma is the real og. She was probably the kingpin, making her lackeys do all the dirty work I could bring in her groceries. Worried about how she'll get her groceries now. How will she transport her precious vegetables to regions that will benefit her?
Silent scan.
I am 30 now, and I still have realizations of things in my life that weren't normal and more reflective of criminal behavior. The whole reason I am compelled to answer is because it makes me reflect. And I just might discover something new about my perspective on life. I like the smell of marijuana because the smell reminds me of being a child. My parents' plants grew in one side of the basement room that my brother and I shared, which was also shared with a 17-foot 6-meter python. I don't think that smoking weed or growing it is bad, but at the time it was illegal. But it is just poor parenting to grow it in your child's room. I grew up watching my parents do coke, get blackout drunk, and beat the shit out of each other. One of my first memories is my parents being arrested, and my grandmother coming to take care of us because that night both parents went to jail. While parents separating is sadly common, my parents had to put their own twist on it. First my dad up and moved us in the middle of the night, with nothing more than our pajamas. My mom eventually got visitation ordered through the courts, but one summer decided she would just take off with us. Child Protective Services found us in Oregon 7 months later. Police came to our school and took us out of class. They put 7-year-old me and my 6-year-old brother in the back of a police car and drove us back to Seattle. Somewhere in the middle of the drive we got handcuffed. We kept hitting the divider and screaming. So for the rest of the drive we kicked it the rest of the way. We didn't know where we were being taken, and they wouldn't let me call my mom. About a year after being back with our dad, he taught me how to sign his checks so I could get the rent out on time. It wasn't until about age 15 that my dad took back control of his checkbook. Somehow that was the age I was supposed to start stealing or something, according to his GF at the time. It never occurred to me to steal. It was just my job to make sure everything would get paid on time. My dad would bring home random women. Found out many years later that many of them were prostitutes. When I took environmental law in college, it occurred to me that I know a few very contaminated sites that I watched the cement poured onto because damn ecology EPA was coming out to inspect, sample, etc. That my friends and I getting free gas from the wrecking yard was not an act of charity, but that they were illegally storing it. Hell. While I worked on my environmental sciences degree, my dad accumulated over 600 violations of the Clean Water Act and was identified as a point source polluter in a Superfund site. There's lots more, but I feel I am ramming. I covered drugs, child abuse, kidnapping, forgery, and quite a bit of disregard for environmental regulations.
Silent scan.
I don't know if I belong in this thread, but growing up I was told my dad was a construction worker, that's why he's gone at night. He always counted a lot of money, like several piles of hundreds. Once my dad gave me and my siblings like $500 each. I used to sit in my room for hours because my dad had friends over. Sometimes we got to get pizza when he had friends over. I think I realized something was up when I learned what weed was and how much there was in my house. Several gym bags worth at least. Now that I think about it, there was a lot that should have tipped me off, like how I was never allowed to answer the door, the expensive gifts, the fights with people I didn't know. His arrest confirmed my suspicions though. Gym bags full of pot and pizza go hand in hand. My mom used to take me along to friends' houses and let me chill ordering PPV movies and eating pizza for hours. When we got the new computer, mid-1990s, my sisters and I got suspicious. It wasn't until we were all in our 20s that my mom admitted she dealt pot for a few years.
Silent scan.
My great-gramps changed his last name to the one I have now due to a murder he committed way back. All his sons were the scariest old men I've ever been around. My mom has told me some vague stories about how they used to deal with people. Luckily my pops decided to play it straight, but he had his psycho moments too. Hell. His own dad sent him to high school with a monkey wrench to deal with a particular bully. Destroyed this kid's face, I guess. To this day there are folks in town who call my dad Wrench. Wow. Gotta tell Pop how much the internet likes him.
Silent scan.
Born into a gang-affiliated family. All my aunts and uncles have the 3 dots tats on their wrist bones, and I knew something was off when I asked what it meant and got awkward looks back. Also scary was when I was 3. My mom was watching America's Most Wanted and saw my uncle on the show.
Silent scan.
I wasn't born into it per se. It was later in my life when I was about 12, but I'll give it a shot. You know something is up, but it's mostly assumed that your family is loosely affiliated with the real criminals. They're money men, accountants, lawyers, etc. I probably knew something was up when my friend said he loved my mom's new Jag, and I replied thanks. One of my stepdad's clients couldn't pay his bill, so he just gave us his car, and my friend replied, "Dude, I don't think that's how it works." Also occasionally, seeing people whose names you recognize or that you have met appear in the newspaper is a dead giveaway as well.
Silent scan.
My father, whom I see about every 2 to 3 years, used to visit and would bring 5 to 6 green things in huge plastic wrapped squares. I was about 10 when he offered me $100 to help him clear out a warehouse with hundreds of empty plant pots filled with dirt. The warehouse also had foil-covered rooms. Then he started bringing in massive white bricks from his truck when he stayed the night. Overheard a family friend talk about him breaking someone's legs with a baseball bat because they owed him money, but was too scared to go to the police. He stopped everything when he got busted and nearly went to prison until his girlfriend at the time took the fall for whatever he was nearly charged with. Now he is worth millions and owns a massive company solely funded by the drugs he used to sell. Father used to sell bricks of coke and weed. Is now worth millions solely from doing so.
Silent scan.
This one's a little different from what I've been seeing here. My family fled from Ukraine right after World War II, across Europe and eventually to the US. My grandfather actually learned to speak English in Great Britain, where he worked in a coal mine. When I was a kid, I asked why we came to the US, and was simply told it was because of the war. What I found out several years later goes a bit deeper. My great-grandfather spoke fluent German. When the Nazis made their push into the USSR, our ancestral homeland was one of the regions that they conquered. Once they put down stakes in my great-grandfather's village, they took stock of the town and found about him being bilingual. They realized that this was a real windfall. They'd have a local who could serve as an interpreter for the workers in the local factory, and a German officer being put in charge of it. He was given the choice to serve in this function or, this being the NSI, being taken outside and shot. Given those choices, he served as the officer's interpreter. I wish that I could tell you that he did Hogan's Heroes style stuff, but I really don't know much about that time. What I do know is that, a few years after the war, he was performing some sort of government-related function. I think he was turning some kind of census. When he was sent to the wrong room, by chance, he found a list of those in the village who were to be purged, i.e. executed, by the order of the Soviet government. His name was on that list, where he was referred to as an NSI collaborator. He went straight home. The family packed their things, and they fled in the night.
Silent scan.
I should have noticed something when my father would give me my college money each semester in cash, or when the bank teller would ask me why my 20s were from 10 years ago. I just thought my parents didn't like banks. I wasn't allowed to have a toll pass, credit card or much of anything trackable, and just chalked it up to paranoid parents. Fast forward years later. I'm babysitting my 8-year-old sister while my parents were out of the state and someone's pounding at the door at about 4 a.m. I grab a knife and answer, with my then fiancé. Undercover cops in civilian clothes were at the door and refused to let me hold their badge to make sure they are legit. My fiancé does not let them in as they have no warrant, and I explain how there's a young child in the house and my parents are out of state. They were very pushy to get inside, and I didn't see the harm in it. But my very smart husband-to-be did not budge, and I'm glad he didn't because they would have torn up the house like they did to my dad's business partner, and probably scarred my younger sister for life. I called my dad, and although he didn't say what was going on, I could just hear the oh shit in his voice. They were afraid of him running since he was close to the Mexican border. But my dad returned home to be arrested and spent a few years in Club Fed. Apparently he grew a lot of pot. But because he was not resistant and plead guilty, it was not nearly as bad as it could have been. However, pot equals terrorism, and so we couldn't even hug him goodbye as he was sentenced and other random rules. We're still paying for it. Plus, he is not allowed to vote, which crushed him more than anything.
Silent scan.
About 8 years old, ATF agents kicked in the door of my house, put me, my mother, and my grandmother face down on the floor, and then went into her bedroom, threw everything out of her closet, busted a hole in the wall of the back of her closet, removed something and then left. I have no idea. But my grandmother was into something. Seriously. No idea if those guys were even really ATF or not. But there was something there. They took it. And nothing more was ever said about it. Also, back when you used to have to pay for long distance, there were multiple calls to Germany on the phone bill every month. Asking about them would be met with, "That's grown-up business, child. Don't stick your nose in unless you want it chopped off." Every other Saturday, a man would come over and give me eclairs. And then he and my grandmother would go to the kitchen and talk. On several occasions, he would come with gifts for me. But I was never allowed to actually have them. Usually it was a doll or stuffed animal of some sort. And even though they were supposedly mine, my grandmother would take them into her room, take the stuffing out and put new stuffing in before giving them to me. Questions about the eclair man or the toys were also adult business. To this day, I don't know what the hell was going on.
Silent scan.